It's been called the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS. Thousands of people, perhaps tens of thousands, infected with contaminated blood in the 1970s and 80s. Of those, nearly 2,500 died after they contracted HIV or hepatitis C. Others have faced a lifetime of illness. Well, today the judge leading the public inquiry into the scandal said that more than 4,000 surviving victims should receive swift compensation of at least £100,000 each. Sir Brian Langstaff said it should happen now rather than wait until the end of the inquiry.
I'm obliged to recognise that the practical way to make payments swiftly is to do so through the current infected blood support schemes. And that's why I've decided to recommend that during interim payments of no less than £100,000 are made to all the infected people and all the bereaved partners who are currently registered with the schemes and those who register between now and the inception of any future scheme.
The contaminated blood was given to people with Hemophilia and other bleeding disorders. They were given new treatments called Factor 8 or 9 to help their blood clot. And to meet demand, those were imported from the United States, where it was made from the blood plasma of paid donors, including some in high-risk groups, such as prisoners. Richard Warwick contracted HIV and 2 forms of hepatitis as a young boy in 1978 because of that contaminated blood. He says today is very significant.
It's the affirmation that wrong was done to our community, and finally, after all this time, it's recognition of the harm that's been done to us.
Des Collins is a senior partner at Collins Solicitors, and he represents about 1,500 victims and joins us on the line. Good evening.
Good evening.
And your reaction to the judge's comments, you must be pleased.
Yes, of course. I share my client's views on this, that it's the end, well, the beginning of the end of a long struggle. And it is, as Richard Warwick just said in your piece, it's recognition which has not been there for the best part of 40 years. And it's comforting for the victims to find that recognition is now in place. But above all else they do want at the end of the day is an apology. And I feel that will come at some point before the end of this inquiry.
In terms of this initial compensation payment, how quickly should it be paid?
Well, the feeling from the chair of the inquiry and the direction from the chair of the inquiry, Sir Brian Langstaff, is that it should be paid as soon as reasonably possible, or he may have in fact used the words immediately in today's ruling. Certainly that's what's come over from him.
Do you think it will?
At the end of the day, yes, it depends on how quickly the Cabinet Office or the government are prepared to make the payment. It is backed up to some extent by, it seems a long time ago now, but Matt Hancock, when he was Health Secretary last summer, appeared before the inquiry. He was asked that question, and he was quite adamant that if at any stage compensation was recommended by the inquiry, that the government would pay it. Now, we'll be back out there on Monday morning to try and put as much pressure as we can on the government to make that payment immediately. And when I say immediately, I don't mean within 3 months, I mean immediately.
Right. Well, within days or weeks.
Yes, I mean, clearly, yes, it must be within days or weeks, yes. I mean, I would have said 14 days is not an unreasonable time for it for the wheels to be put in motion, and that's what we'll be asking for on Monday.
And to whom will it be paid at this stage?
The interim payment, and I stress it is an interim payment to abide the final quantification of any damages which the victims may be due. The payments will be made to the victims who are still alive and the bereaved partners of those victims who have died. And that's where you get the figures which have been used today are coming up to, I can't remember what the figure is now, 400 million, something like that.
Yeah. But
that does leave a lot of people out, which is sad. It's disappointing. A lot of the people who have been left out are those people who, for example, parents who lost children, children who lost parents. Now, we did put We did put submissions to the inquiry on the basis of those victims, and the response has been, well, the inquiry will look at that at a later stage and may no, I can't say they may well make an award of an interim payment because they haven't said that. But the indication is that we can put further submissions in. We intend to do that.
You mentioned that this has gone on for 40 years. Why do you think it's taken so long to get to this point?
It's taken so long to get to this point because no one was prepared to admit they had done anything wrong. You start right at day one when someone did do something wrong, quite innocently, doing the best they could in the circumstances, maybe or maybe not. That remains to be seen by the inquiry or determined by the inquiry. But back in the day 40 years ago, mistakes were made. And those mistakes were covered up. And of course, the first administration which covers up the mistake, or the first health secretary, or the first administration which covers up the mistakes, moves out. The second administration comes in, and they follow the line of the first administration. Before you know who you are, you're about 15 years down the line, as I should say. And no one really remembers what the truth is, because everyone remembers what the last administration said. Everyone remembers what the government line to take is. And the government line very quickly became, we did nothing wrong, we did everything that could be done in the circumstances. And behind the scenes, the view was, well, we can't afford to pay it anyway, so we may as well stick to this line. Now, that line has been exposed in the public inquiries, certainly over its running over the past 6 months, to be false. It wasn't the case that they had done everything reasonably possible to achieve the right result. They quite clearly didn't, but they put that line forward, and once that line was accepted after 2 or 3 years, no one would change it, because succeeding health secretaries come in and they follow the line of the civil service. The civil service said, well, this is the line your predecessor took, so this is the line you took.
Just in the time we've got left, sorry to interrupt you, is it possible that the total compensation bill could run into the billions?
It is possible, yes. I mean, no one has begun to calculate the correct figures, but yes, it could well run into that level, and that is one of the reasons why the successive governments have refused to acknowledge what went on. It might have been a lot less if they'd acknowledged it earlier on.
Thank you very much for joining us this evening. That was Des Collins, Senior Partner at Collins Solicitors, representing about 1,500 victims of that infected blood scandal.